Welcome to the latest episode of the Informing Choices mini-pod. This is the second in our series looking at the potential implications on the future of work together with Working the Future in partnership. Today, we're unpacking a phenomenon that's reshaping our world, Industry 4.0, the unstoppable march of technology. Did you ever wonder what's fueling this tech revolution? We're diving into three big drivers that are pushing us forward, but it's not just about the tech, it's about where we're heading. By 2030, this road could lead us to utopian innovation or dystopian disruption. What is crucial is to turn insights into action. So we'll wrap up this session by exploring what organizations can start doing today to navigate this tech tidal wave. So whether you're a tech enthusiast, a business leader, or just curious about the future, you're in the right place. Once again, I'm delighted to be able to welcome founding director of Working the Future, Cat Barnard, to this collaborative series of podcasts. Cat, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for having me.
Let me start with this. What do you mean by Industry 4.0?
Industry 4.0 is probably a little bit of a moniker term that we've adopted here at Working the Future, really to comprise all the different ways in which all the different types of technology are impacting the way that we work. So if you are interested in looking at how technology is transforming the way in which humans undertake their daily work, the World Economic Forum has got a very good list of all the different types of technology. It has since 2016, I think, been referring to this latest acceleration of technology as the fourth industrial revolution. So listeners are probably aware of the first and second industrial revolutions. The third industrial revolution is described as being the one where computing accelerated the way in which we work and derive economic value. And the fourth industrial revolution relates to a range of tech, including but not limited to artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, but also going into your realm, Steve, pharma and healthcare, things like nanotechnology, biotechnology, and then looking even further afield into materials science, energy storage, and quantum computing. Caveat, those are well beyond my bailiwick of understanding. But the point being that the advances that we've made in recent years in technology and computing power and falling costs of data storage, etc., really augment and open up possibility in other areas of technology. So things like, biotechnology, now that we've sequenced the human genome, what could be possible when we intersect that specialism within science with computing power? Where might that take us in terms of identifying solutions that enhance and prolong human life? Anybody's guess.
Yeah, there's a big question. So within the context of Industry 4.0 and this is a meta trend, what would you say are the three key drivers behind this trend? If you drill down a little bit more, what is it that's really driving Industry 4.0? And I guess you started to touch on that to some extent.
Money. Money, as in the stock markets are quite obsessed with increasingly fast-paced return on investment, and the technology sector is deemed to be a sector that will deliver increasingly high yields. So I always think, any sector that is well supported by venture capitalist funding or private equity funding is always going to motor along far faster than an alternative, which is less well funded. But if you look at some of the data points that we've pulled out in our Foresight Focus 24 report, some of the numbers, I mean, you know, for most of us, they are absolutely eye-watering and almost hard to get your head around, because we're not even talking about billions anymore. We're now talking about trillions, and you know, how many zeros is that behind the initial number? But as an example, and this is now kind of old data, but Silicon Valley and Bay Area's companies' market capitalization climbed 5.5 trillion US dollars to 12.6 trillion between April 2020 and July 2021. So you think of the money that is pouring into the American Bay Area for innovation and investment in emergent technologies. You look at things like the size and scale of the global AI market and how that is accelerating every single week because of the hyper-competitive nature of that specific technology stack. So we captured that global AI market size was valued at 454.12 billion US dollars in 2022. I'm not sure that we've got more up-to-date data than that, but these numbers are absolutely eye-watering, and there seems to be a global sense amongst nation states that, like it or loathe it, the investment is necessary, because if we don't invest, we risk losing out to a more dominant nation state. So I think you probably have had to have been fast asleep not to have noticed the escalating tensions between, for instance, the United States and China in this war, this soft war for technological dominance. I mean, it's probably not even right for us to gauge who we think will win that war, but you know, as things stand at the moment, it's pretty neck and neck, and the race, the pursuit of technological dominance becomes ever more exponential in its speed because of the political power struggle that sits closely behind it, right? And I think for me, the third one, which actually does alarm me in equal measure, perhaps even more so, is that we seem to live in such a reductivist world now where there's an idea of, well, can we do this? So a lot of the innovations that are taking place, I'm not convinced are taking place necessarily for the betterment of society. I think that a lot of the innovations that are taking place are as much about, can we do this? Can we do it? And then, you know, once a technology or a piece of technological progress, I beg your pardon, has been deemed to be successful, then comes a question: is this in the best interest of society or humanity? And I'm, you know, I worked in technology for 25 years, and I just feel very strongly, just because we can doesn't mean we should. You know, if I look at the impact of social media on mental health, and that's a far from resolved and understood phenomenon, but the early indicators suggest heavily that there is a pretty cemented correlation between the rise in social media usage and a deterioration in general mental health, but certainly young people and, you know, young adolescent mental health. So a lot of these technologies that are being developed I do wonder, well, I don't wonder at all, actually, Steve. I would question the extent to which there is equal measure of philosophical and ethical debate about the use cases.
Do you think that's just a continuation of what we've seen throughout history, though, in the kind of regulation, control, making sense of what technologies might be able to do for us, just follows the discovery and maturity of technologies? So is it something that society as a whole has to do something to keep up with? And it just so happens that whereas in the past these things have come along in reasonable isolation and at a pace that we can generally manage, whereas at the moment, and you in the last episode you really nicely laid out the technological landscape with new technologies from 3D printing, artificial intelligence, robotics, quantum computing. You've got this massive technological landscape. And actually, as a society, we can't cope with making sense of the implications of those as well as we used to in the past.
Yeah, I think the convergence of all these different technologies, the evolution of these technologies compounds the issue that we're not in a fit state to be able to take measure of what the consequences of the adoption of these technologies could have for societies. And I also think, and I say this as somebody that didn't study history at school, but it seems clear to me that we are terrible as a species at contemplating or learning from history. I think we're absolutely dreadful at learning. We know very little about civilization collapse, for instance. We certainly don't seem to. We seem to live in a state of absolute deliberate ignorance when it comes to what we know, what is on record about human calamity in the past. I think cognitive dissonance is rife and alive and kicking in 2021. So I think we see what we want to see, and unfortunately, we live in a world where money equals power, and so the cultural narratives that we're fed every single day serve those who are holding the money and those who are holding the power, and to hell with the real consequences of what might fall out later for us all.
So almost naturally, we've kind of gone down that fairly dystopian rabbit hole because it's so easy to do, and that seems to be what we're fed through media as well. That you think about some of these technologies and there's a very dystopian outlook that could present itself to us. But what I wanted to do is not throw that away, because we need to be aware of the risks into the future of industry 4.0, but also there is an opportunity for us to be very optimistic about how these things might evolve by say 2030 and beyond. So what might this look like? What might a pessimistic view look like? And I guess as we've just been talking about that, let's carry on that. But then let's balance that by thinking about how could what we're seeing that we're articulating as Industry 4.0 give us reasons to be optimistic?
Well, look, without delving too deeply into it, I think we can probably all conjure in our minds a recollection of a dystopian sci-fi film that we will have watched on one of our preferred entertainment channels. So I think worst case, we can all think of at least one sci-fi film with a dystopian hellscape, end of days kind of backdrop. But in equal measure, if we take time to marry the pace at which these technologies are evolving with seasoned, reasoned philosophical debate about the safety parameters for healthy adoption, we could end up in a scenario where, and I think we probably will anyway, but we will end up in a scenario where we see the end of the standardized 40-hour working week, where people have more time to focus on leisure activities. And I was really kicking myself. What's the name of the economist who was prevalent after the Second World War, who said that, 70 years hence, we would all be working, 15, 20-hour work weeks. Obviously, those scenarios haven't happened, and there's much, much, much to be still debated about the plausibility of things like universal basic income and so on and so forth. That if we were to balance out the extreme march of technology with a greater degree of philosophical and humanitarian debate around good practice, safety parameters, technology for good, ethical technology, all of those things, then we could end up with a society that works more inclusively for far more people. But the worst case, bluntly, is that we end up with more inequality and more wealth held by a decreasingly small percentage of the population, and escalating geopolitical frictions, because, as I said before, tech is already being considered, or these next generation technologies are being considered as a kind of arms race.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And finally, for this episode, you've spoken a lot there about the underlying technologies, how technology and funding investment potentially matches up with commercializing some of these technologies, but then you ended there by talking about a rebalancing towards social need rather than business need, if you like. So with everything that we've spoken about, what action do you think an organization could take today to improve how their organization works, what their organization does to kind of make them become more successful?
Well, look, I think the enterprise technology landscape has expanded to such an extent in the last 10 years alone that making decisions about the best technology to adopt for an enterprise now has almost surpassed the intellectual reach of most CIOs, CTOs. It's no longer humanly possible for even the most expert CIO, CTO to comprehensively identify which are the best technologies to deploy, and they will always be challenged by one of their C-suite colleagues who rushes in on a Monday morning, having read an article in one of the Sunday broadsheets about somebody over there doing something amazing with some technology that immediately needs to be, teleported into this setting. I think any business that wants to survive and thrive in the coming years and months needs to think more holistically about the optimal mix of its decision makers. I think in the C-suite, we need to make sure that we have got critical thinking capability as a mainstay, so that we can think in a more broad way about the best way in which technologies are adopted. So critical thinking in the C-suite would be one recommendation. Another recommendation would be to sort of, in as much as this is possible, is to slow down slightly and think about the impact of the adoption of these new technologies on the human stakeholders, because most technologies that are in use in commercial settings today haven't been optimized. The users haven't received optimal training and how best to use these technologies to do their work well and efficiently. So it's almost like we're clutching at straws. We're introducing all these new technologies, but perhaps only ever with, I don't know, 10, 20% knowledge of how best to use them. So I don't think we can underplay the reskilling, upskilling requirement for internal stakeholders, bearing in mind also, and I think you and I may have spoken about this in the past, you know, almost every week you can turn on a program or a platform or a piece of tech that you use, only to have found that the user interface will have changed, it will have upgraded itself, and you're in this continuous state of perpetual newbie trying to catch up with what's changed. I think we have to embrace fluidity and flexibility and different ways of working at every turn. But in order to navigate any of this, we have to reprioritize what it means to be a human at work. Because if we can nurture these conditions of trust, I think we can probably overcome most things. But if we rely on the technology as some kind of salvational cure-all, it's likely to disappoint us.
That felt like a really nice summary then, and I guess what you've really nicely encapsulated is that in order to create an industry 4.0 using technology in an appropriate way, our focus should be on social and human, not on technology.
Yeah, if we can marry those two things up, I think we have a very good chance of creating a future we want. But if we deprioritize social and human, I think we could easily, unfortunately, end up in quite a dystopian tech future that doesn't work for anybody.
Kat, that's been absolutely fascinating. So that's what we mean by Industry 4.0. In the podcast description, you'll find a link to Working the Future and the website and how you can contact Kat. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another episode. Tell your friends and colleagues about the Informing Choices mini pod, and I'll see you on another episode very soon.